Imagine your brain is a finely tuned radar system, constantly scanning the environment for the slightest movement, the faintest sound, the newest opportunity. In the modern world, sitting at a desk under fluorescent lights for 8 hours a day, that highly sensitive radar system is diagnosed as a disorder. They call it ADHD. You are told you lack focus, that you are too impulsive, that you cannot pay attention to the task at hand. But what if I told you that the exact traits that make it so difficult to sit still in a cubicle today were the very reasons your ancestors survived the harshest environments on Earth? Today, we are going to look at human history from a completely different angle. We are going back tens of thousands of years to understand why the very things society labels as flaws were actually the ultimate evolutionary advantages. Your brain is not broken. It just might be built for a world that no longer exists. Before we dive into the fascinating science of how our ancestors' minds worked, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment down below if you have ever felt like your brain is just wired differently than what society expects. Have you ever felt out of place in a traditional classroom or office setting? I would love to read about your experiences. Let us start by looking at a concept known as the hunter versus farmer hypothesis. Back in 1992, a radio host and author named Tom Hartman proposed a radical idea. He suggested that ADHD is not a disease or a defect, but rather a collection of behavioral traits that were highly adaptive for hunter-gatherer societies. Think about what it takes to be a successful hunter in the wild. You need to be constantly vigilant, continuously scanning your environment for both prey and predators. This is what we now call distractibility. You need to be ready to spring into action at a moment's notice without overthinking, which today we label as impulsivity. And when you finally spot your target, you need to be able to lock onto it to the exclusion of everything else, tracking it for miles if necessary. We now call this hyperfocus. For a hunter-gatherer, these traits were not a disorder. They were the difference between life and death. If you were a hunter who was deeply focused on examining a single leaf for hours, completely ignoring the snapping twigs behind you, you probably would not survive very long. You needed a brain that rewarded novelty-seeking, rapid shifting of attention, and quick reactions. Now contrast this with the skills needed to be a successful farmer. Agriculture completely changed the trajectory of human history. Farming requires patience, routine, long-term planning, and the ability to perform repetitive tasks day after day. You have to plant seeds, weed the fields, water the crops, and wait months for a harvest. This lifestyle rewards people who are content with doing the same thing over and over, who are not easily bored, and who can sustain attention on unstimulating tasks for long periods. If this perspective is making you rethink how you view attention and focus, hit that like button. It really helps get this information out to more people who might be struggling with how their own minds work and need to hear it. As human societies transitioned from nomadic tribes to settled agricultural communities, the environment changed, but human genetics did not change nearly as fast. The traits that made the hunters successful became a liability in a society designed for farmers. And this brings us to the actual biology and genetics behind this phenomenon. One of the most fascinating pieces of evidence for this evolutionary advantage revolves around a specific genetic variation known as the DRD47R allele. DRD4 is a dopamine receptor gene. Dopamine, as you might know, is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, reward, and pleasure. People with ADHD often have variations in their dopamine system, meaning their brains seek out more stimulation to feel satisfied. The 7R variant of this gene is heavily associated with novelty-seeking, behavior, impulsivity, and ADHD. Scientists have traced this specific genetic variation back tens of thousands of years. They found that it became increasingly common as human populations migrated out of Africa and spread across the globe. Why? Because the people who had this gene were the explorers, the risk-takers, the ones who were restless enough to cross oceans and mountains to see what was on the other side. They have even dubbed it the nomad gene. But the most compelling proof comes from a real-world study of a modern tribe. In the early 2000s, anthropologists studied the Ariel people of Kenya. Historically, the Ariel were nomadic pastoralists, constantly moving their herds to find new grazing lands. However, recently, part of the tribe decided to settle down and take up farming, while the other part continued their traditional nomadic lifestyle. The researchers tested the tribe members for the DRD47R gene. What they discovered was absolutely mind-blowing. Among the nomadic group, those who carried the ADHD-associated 7R gene were actually better nourished and had a higher body mass index than those without it. In the nomadic environment, their restlessness, their need for action, and their willingness to explore made them more successful at finding resources and defending their herds. They were thriving. But when the researchers looked at the settled, farming group of the aerial, the results were completely flipped. The individuals in the settled villages who carried the exact same 7R gene were significantly undernourished compared to their peers. In a stationary, repetitive agricultural environment, their genetic traits were no longer an advantage. They were a disadvantage. This study is powerful because it perfectly illustrates the concept of evolutionary mismatch. Your genes have not changed, but your environment has. Let me know in the comments if you resonate more with the nomad or the settler lifestyle. Do you thrive on change, movement, and high-pressure situations, or do you prefer predictability, routine, and steady progress? We live in an incredibly artificial world. The modern industrial society, the school system with its bells and standardized tests, the 9-to-5 corporate job with its endless spreadsheets and meetings, these were all designed for the farmer brain. The Industrial Revolution essentially took the farmer mindset and put it on an assembly line. Schools were literally modeled after factories to produce obedient workers who could sit still for 8 hours, follow instructions, and perform repetitive tasks without getting bored or rebelling. If you have a hunter brain in a farmer world, of course you are going to struggle. You are being asked to suppress your natural instincts. Your brain is starved for the dopamine hit of a real challenge, an urgent crisis, or a new discovery. When it does not get that stimulation from the environment, it creates its own by fidgeting, daydreaming, or bouncing from one thought to another. We often pathologize these behaviors because they are inconvenient for modern institutions. But it is crucial to recognize that context is everything. If you are finding value in understanding the hidden strengths behind what society often calls flaws, consider subscribing to the channel. We dive deep into the psychology, history, and the untold stories of human potential every single week. And having you along for the journey means everything. So what do we do with this information? If you identify with the hunter mindset, how do you survive in a farmer's world? The answer is not to force yourself to become a farmer. The answer is to find environments, careers, and lifestyles that reward your hunter traits. Notice how people with ADHD often thrive in high-stakes, fast-paced environments. They make incredible emergency room doctors, firefighters, and first responders because when a crisis hits, their brains suddenly lock in. While everyone else is panicking, the hunter brain is finally in its element. They are overrepresented among entrepreneurs, inventors, and artists because these fields require novelty, risk-taking, and the ability to pivot rapidly. When they find a project they are passionate about, they can tap into that ancient hyper-focus, working for days on end to bring their vision to life. You do not have a deficit of attention. You have an abundance of attention that is simply waiting for a target worthy of your focus. Our ancient ancestors did not survive despite these traits. They survived because of them. They were the ones keeping watch in the dark, the ones pushing the boundaries of the known world, and the ones leading the charge into the unknown. The next time you feel frustrated because you cannot seem to fit into the neat, predictable boxes that society has drawn for you, remember the aerial tribe. Remember the hunters. You are carrying the genetic legacy of the people who kept humanity alive during its most dangerous days. Your brain is not a mistake. It is an evolutionary masterpiece. You just need to find your wild.